Hey, Hunter dude, what you doing?
Oh, dude, I'm going on a say hunt, man.
A say hunt?
Oh, yeah, dude. Say is a monster, and it's everywhere. Say is everywhere.
Say, the reflexive object pronoun?
Yeah, dude, they're everywhere.
I don't know if say is as common as you think.
Dude, I see it everywhere with my own two eyes. Well, I see them. There are at least 4 or 5 different types of say. Right when you think you got them, there's this whole other species or something.
I don't know, Hunter dude. I think there's only one say, reflexive say.
Dude, did you not read the book? Did your teacher not tell you?
No, they did.
There's passive say.
But passive say is just reflexive say in a slightly different context sometimes.
Well, there's still impersonal say.
Impersonal say is almost the same as passive say, and they're both still reflexive say. There's only one say, Hunter dude.
What about reciprocal say?
What about it? That's barely even a different context. Listen, Hunter dude, I know you're scared. Say used to scare me too. How about this? Let's go on that say hunt together. Does that sound good?
See, dude, you do that for me?
Of course I would. And along the way, whenever we encounter one of those cute little says, I'll show you how it's just a simple, harmless, innocent, reflexive object pronoun. Okay?
Okay, dude.
There's nothing to be scared of, Hunter dude. There's only one say. Hola, soy Jordan, and this is a Spanish Quickie. Fast, easy Spanish lessons from somebody who speaks your language. This video is basically a sequel to my last video, Se is a monster, monsters aren't real. You'll understand this video way better if you've already seen that video. But no matter what, the more you've got reflexive verbs and pronouns down, the better you'll understand this video. And of course, an open mind goes a long way. Before we get our hunt on though, I want to say something. Se is like an airplane crash. We notice every single crash. We remember every single crash, but we pay no attention to the thousands upon thousands of safe, smooth, picture-perfect landings that take place every single day. Airplane crashes lead us to draw 2 incorrect conclusions, which is to say, airplane crashes make us irrational in 2 ways. They make us think airplanes crash way more than they do, and that in turn makes us think it's more dangerous to fly than it is, more of a reason to fear it. Not cool, news, not cool. Well, we only notice se when it's weird to us or confuses us. We don't notice as much all the times se doesn't seem weird or confusing. Then, since we only notice the confusing instances of se, we think it's harder than it really is, that there's more of a reason to fear it than there really is. Then, always there to flame the fire, the Spanish authority scares us even more by claiming there are a million different types of se, but neglecting to mention, sometimes at best they gloss over it quickly then never remind us again, that those different types of se are all just slightly different contexts of the same reflexive se. In other words, they don't give us the context of their contexts. Not cool, school, not cool. Se also made me irrational. Plan A for this video didn't pan out. I was gonna hunt through a news article for examples of se, then make the video using those examples. But I quickly saw there weren't nearly enough examples in one article, so I bumped it up to 2, then 3, then moved on to plan B. I put on an episode of Better Call Saul from Netflix, planning to pause it every time somebody said se in the subtitles. But after 5 minutes, with 0 examples written down, I moved on to plan C. I'd Google se and use the top 10 headlines all containing se. And that's what I did. I didn't pick, I didn't choose, I didn't look for certain patterns to hit. This is reality. Well, as real as we're gonna get in a short video, 10 is still a small sample size. And speaking of that, I looked through the 10 headlines and all of them were so simple and so clear. While that's cool, it also scared me. What if I was about to prove my point to you using only easy examples? The goal of this video is the opposite. I hated making the last se video with such simple, unrealistic examples. It was so long though, I couldn't fit more in. That's when I decided to make this follow-up. But I think we're cool. The problem is, I can't remember which ones used to be tricky. Other than when it's in metaphors or expressions, se seems so simple to me now. It's hard to even imagine room for confusion. Then I remembered se come and se gasta. Those are 2 of the weirdest, right? Eat yourself, spend yourself? So after the top 10 headlines, toward the end of this video, we'll go over a few examples with se come and se gasta. But warning, by the time we get there, it'll be boring and you won't learn much. Because by then, we'll already have gone through the top 10 and you'll be confused just like me. Not about se, but about which se examples used to confuse you. Does that prospect excite you? Then let's do this. ¿Cuándo se podrán hacer apuestas deportivas en Estados Unidos? Not translating it literally, but what we'd say in English for that is something like, when will they be able to make sports bets in the United States? Or when will they allow sports betting in the United States? But literally that's, when will they be able to make for themselves sports betting bets in the United States? Or when will they be able to make sports bets for themselves in the United States? To truly understand se and whatever vibe it gives off, you have to remember they speak reflexively in Spanish way more often than we do in English. It's like the sit thing. They sit is se sientan, which is literally they sit themselves. But when they sit, they are literally sitting themselves in a chair, on the couch. It only sounds super weird to us because we don't usually say they sit themselves. But we do sometimes. They sit themselves in those chairs all day and study. When it's a context we're not used to, it seems weird. When it's a context we are used to, it doesn't seem weird. Se podrán hacer is very similar in many ways to se sientan. It's just se isn't required like it is with se sientan. But by its very nature, by default, with the word hacer, when they make something, they make it for themselves, on their own behalves. In English, sometimes we point that out, sometimes we don't. In this context, when will they be able to make bets for themselves? It seems weird. But like I said, when they make a bet, they are literally making a bet for themselves. If not, that has to be stated. They make bets for Jimmy or whoever. And in Spanish, if they make bets for somebody else, se can't be used. So we know for sure, in this context, they're making bets for themselves. And I'm pretty sure the Spanish authority would call that the impersonal se, because the subject isn't stated, I guess. It's like the general they. It's not speaking of anybody specifically. It's impersonal. Did I state their case strongly and specifically enough? I don't want to downplay or gloss over what they're saying, like they do. But we do know who the subjects are. They're obviously the people, las personas, in the United States. If it didn't specify the United States, it would be the people in general. If it was cuando se podrá hacer apuestas, podrá instead of podrán, the meaning wouldn't change even a little. It would still be translated as when will they be able to make bets. The subject is still even the people, it's just la gente now. But the subject in this sentence has to be the people of the United States. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. And in Spanish, it couldn't be se. Of course it's impersonal if they say it's impersonal. That's true. It's just not complete. Impersonal se is a slightly special context of the normal reflexive se. And that context is worthwhile to point out. But by itself, it's misleading. It's much more honest, accurate, and helpful to show how the impersonal se, while weird at first, different at first, is the same as the reflexive se. Then we can understand how se works naturally from logic alone anytime we see it, even when it's with words or in sentences like we've never seen before. Some people in the comments of the last video said they think of the impersonal se as one. So when will one be able to make sports bets in the United States? No, you do not think of it that way. That's implanted in our minds by the Spanish authority. In modern times, around these parts at least, one does not naturally talk like that, unless one wants no friends. I only talk like that if I want to specifically sound snobby or authoritarian, which I only do to mock people. It's a similar story with this one. El pragmatismo se rinde. Rinde comes from rendir, which is a tricky verb. Rendir wasn't even on my radar until a few months ago, but since then, it's confused me quite a few times. And this is one of those times. I wasn't sure what this headline meant at first. I didn't even know if rendir was a good thing or a bad thing in this sentence, because rendir can mean to render or produce, but it can also mean to beat or to tire or exhaust or even to quit or surrender. Seemingly opposite ideas, no? But I think in this case, el pragmatismo se rinde means more the pragmatism runs out of steam or exhausts itself. This article is from Spain and talks of the situation in Catalonia. I guess some dude with a supremacist and excluding ideology won an election. So they're saying pragmatism lost to extremism. But by using se rinde here, it has the vibe of pragmatism exhausts itself or defeats itself, which is basically the same thing. They're saying it's out of ideas, or maybe they're going for the slightly different vibe of pragmatism quits. It doesn't matter. All that matters is you have the right image in your head of what happened. And in this context, exhausts itself or runs out of steam or quits even. To quit is running out of steam. You quit when you're exhausted. It's all the same idea. So no matter which word you choose to describe it, in this context, se rinde should create the same image in your mind. Pragmatism beat itself by running out of ideas, which is kind of quitting by not contesting, more than they lost or were beaten by the other side, even though obviously they lost an election. I need to make a video about rendir one day. Okay, next example. Pablo Casado niega irregularidades en su carrera de derecho y se siente difamado. Pablo Casado denies irregularities with his law degree and feels defamed. But more literally, that's Pablo Casado denies irregularities with his law degree and feels for himself defamed or feels defamed for himself. When I first heard la carrera, career, used for degree or major like this, I thought it was weird. But then I realized we actually do say career for college sometimes, like college career. We do say that, right? Regardless, I guess the word career refers to a timeline or a track we take during an era of our lives. But in Spanish, it's also commonly used used to refer to the university or college era. More importantly, se siente difamado clearly means he feels defamed for himself, which in this context seems weird to us. But change the context even a little, he feels embarrassed for himself, and all of a sudden it's not so weird. What we're used to seems normal. What we're not used to seems weird. In this example, it's especially helpful to remember that se always has a feeling of to or for or even of or on built into it, even when we don't say any of those words in English or Spanish. I call that the spackle theory. In this case, we say se means whatever we need it to mean to make the sentence sound okay. With sentar, se sienta, the se just means himself. He sits himself. But now with sentir, se siente, the se means for himself. He feels defamed for himself. So se can mean himself, to himself, for himself, of himself, or on himself. Probably some others too. And same goes for her and you formal and them. But in all those translations, se is telling us where the action of the verb is going. You can almost physically see the arrow going from the verb back to the subject pronoun. Even with se sienta, which translates literally to he sits himself, we're not using to or for to make our translation sound okay, but you can still see the action of the verbs being done to the subject. You can still see that arrow once you know to look. That's why indirect object pronouns, and se is just a specialized indirect object pronoun, usually answer questions that start with to or for. To whom? For whom? It's only usually because sometimes those questions start with of who or on who. Se and all indirect object pronouns always have to or for or on or of or whatever else we need them to have built into them. We've already translated se two ways so far. Se podrán hacer, they make for themselves, so for themselves. Then el pragmatismo se rinde, pragmatism exhausts itself, just itself now. Then se siente difamado, he feels defamed for himself again. Let's move on and see what else we find. La hija de Will Smith revela que se hizo cortes en la muñeca por el estrés de la fama. Will Smith's daughter reveals she cut her wrists because of the stress of fame. Poor girl. But more literally, that's saying she made cuts to herself on the wrist due to the stress of fame. This one's clearly reflexive, right? And notice how se means to herself now, not just herself or for herself. Se is serving exactly the same function, we just translate it differently in English. And even though saying she made cuts to herself on the wrist sounds a little weird, change the context even a little, she cut herself on the wrist instead of made cuts, or she made cuts to herself without on the wrist. And the English translations with herself or to herself don't even sound weird anymore. Okay, I think we can go to the next example. Como Assange se convirtió en un invitado no deseado en la embajada de Ecuador. How Assange became an undesired guest in Ecuador's embassy. Or more literally, how Assange converted himself into an undesired guest in Ecuador's embassy. The fact that convertirse is used for to become is a story for another day. But you do see how when we become something or something else from our own actions, we are converting ourselves, right? Bottom line, Assange became or converted himself into an undesired guest. They're obviously going to talk about his behavior in this article, something he did. But also, obviously, this is another example of se as a reflexive object pronoun. I think even the Spanish authority would agree. Become is a crazy word. There are so many ways to say it in Spanish, depending on what you become and how you become it. But I can't think of any right now that don't include se, because becoming is doing something to yourself by nature. Okay, next example. Amancio Ortega se compra un nuevo barco para navegar por Galicia, or por Galicia. Amancio Ortega buys a new boat to navigate through Galicia, or Amancio Ortega buys a new boat for himself to navigate through Galicia. We wouldn't say for himself by default in this context, but there are many contexts where we would. Buy for himself isn't so weird, probably because just like hacer and sentar, and I guess every verb, anytime we buy something, unless it's specifically stated otherwise, we buy it for ourselves. It's literally, physically what happens. And in Spanish, if we buy something for somebody else, we can't use se. This is too easy, right? I guess what's going on is, once you look at this with an open mind and accept that they speak reflexively more often than we do, but that most of the time, all the time, we do a verb, we by default do it to ourselves, even though we usually don't say so in English. And once you know that se has to, for, of, or on built into it, and that the subject by default is people or persons, all kind of logical stuff anyway, se just isn't that hard. Yeri Mina se la juega en el mundial. Okay, this one's tricky. If it had just been se juega, I would have been fine. He plays for himself in the World Cup. Just like the last example, we don't talk like that by default, but in the right context, we would say he plays for himself. Like he's not playing for the money or for the fans hands, he's playing for himself? It's that la that confused me. What does the la represent? It can't be the World Cup, like I first assumed, because it's El Mundial, not La Mundial. I asked my friend in Mexico, and he told me it was a common expression or metaphor they use when somebody's risking something. So, se la juega means he's risking himself. He's playing it for himself, it being some abstract metaphorical gamble. But after letting that marinate for a while and looking up other examples, I think the la stands for la vida. Like he's playing the game of life for himself. He's playing it for himself. Se la juega. Yeah, I think that's it. So it makes a cool headline because they're playing on the two different meanings of play. Se juega in this headline means he's literally, physically playing in the World Cup, but with la, it also means he's gambling or risking himself by playing in the World Cup. And that all makes sense, I think, with the context. I perused the article. This guy's being blamed for a recent loss and his contract's up. He's risking his career, his reputation, his money by playing in the World Cup. He's playing the game of life by playing in the World Cup. I love this stuff. Okay, next example, just as fun. El copiloto chino que se salió por la ventana de un avión a 10,000 metros de altura y sobrevivió. The Chinese co-pilot that fell through the window of an airplane at 10,000 meters of altitude and survived. But more literally, the Chinese co-pilot that went out himself through the window of an airplane at an altitude of 10,000 meters and survived. Okay, se always has one job. It tells us to whom or for whom or what the action of the verb goes. And usually, specifically, it tells us the action goes back to the subject. But there are sometimes other consequences of se's presence, like in this example. In this context, and this happens with some frequency, se adds this accidental vibe. So, el copiloto chino que salió por la ventana, without se, that means the co-pilot that went out through the window, like exited, on purpose. He meant to do it, unless the context tells us otherwise. But el copiloto chino que se salió por la ventana, with se, in this context specifically, tells us he went out through the window accidentally. And going out through the window accidentally, that's what falling is. So, el copiloto chino que se salió por la ventana really translates to, and this is what actually happened, the Chinese co-pilot that fell through the window. Dormir is a more common example of the same thing. He slept on the couch would be él dormió en el sofá, but he fell asleep on the couch, and falling asleep is sleeping on accident in this case, would be él se dormió en el sofá. Now, se salió doesn't always mean he fell, and se dormió doesn't always mean he fell asleep, and se doesn't always add the accidental vibe. It just depends on the context. It always depends on the context. And it's total coincidence that both English translations with se had the word fell in them, I think. Okay, next example, and this is the last of the 10. Kellogg's se va de Venezuela después de más de medio siglo. Kellogg's flees from Venezuela after more than half a century. I chose flees in the English translation because that's the vibe I got from this sentence. I know the situation in Venezuela isn't good and it's getting worse, but more than that, se va literally means goes for itself here, which can mean for its own sake. I mean, for sure, it can mean physically go yourself, like take yourself out. But with this context, I see it like Kellogg's is getting the heck out of there, not just leaving because the contract is up. They're getting out for their own sake. They're saving themselves. It's not a good place to do business. They're under threat in some way. Sales, government, it doesn't matter. But I don't get all that from se, and it doesn't come from the other parts of the sentence either. That fleeing vibe comes from the combination of se with those parts in that order in this context. If you knew nothing about Venezuela's situation, you'd still get the gist of this headline, but you wouldn't be able to get the fleeing vibe until you got more context by reading the article. Because se va doesn't automatically mean flee. It means the more general to go yourself, to take yourself, that kind of thing. In English, we often just say to go. Am I crazy, or do you feel the same? All the se examples that used to confuse me and seem so weird are so simple, clear, and not weird now. Like I said before, I'm not even sure what used to confuse me. And now we know se come doesn't mean he eats himself, it means he eats for himself, on his own behalf, which sounds weird at first, but is literally what happens when he eats, unless stated otherwise, and in which case se can't be used. So now examples like un plato que se come las calorías just make sense. Okay, bad first example. This one's still weird for sure, but not because of se. This sentence really does mean a plate that eats for itself the calories, a plate that eats the calories for itself, or just a plate that eats the calories. It's about a special plate with ridges at the bottom where the grease from food drains, so the food doesn't sit in the grease, thus the plate eats the calories. It's just a normal reflexive example, but metaphorical. Metaphorical? And actually, the only tricky part going from Spanish to English is understanding all the metaphors and expressions. But that's a metaphor and expression issue, not a se issue. And I guess going from English to Spanish, the tricky thing is knowing when to use se, when not to, to, and when we have a choice. And when it's a choice, does it change the meaning of the sentence? Yes? No? All those are always real possibilities, and I believe something we just have to memorize. Though in the good news department, there are patterns, so each time you memorize one use, understanding the next one becomes easier. Without more memorization, you'll feel it. But like always, that only comes from making lots of mistakes. Luckily, in these situations, mistakes with "sa," they'll rarely stop you from being understood. Most of the time, you'll just sound a little funny. Or cute. Probably cute. Just like we think of them with their accents and funny little mistakes. So don't forget to get out there and make lots of mistakes, you cutie pie. Here's a fun one. El secretario de Educación se come las uñas. Same thing as the last one, with a twist. The Secretary of Education eats for himself his nails. Or just, the Secretary of Education bites his nails. We say bite, they say eat, and I think they can also say bite for nails too, morder. But it doesn't matter. What matters is, in Spanish, se come las uñas can mean he bites his nails literally, but it's also an expression for to be nervous. This makes a funny headline for that reason. I'm guessing because this dude got caught literally biting his nails, but also because he has a reason to be nervous, like most politicians do. So, se come las uñas, in the literal sense, he's biting his nails, but also in the metaphorical sense, he's nervous. Fun with words. Then, se gasta is the same as se come. Super easy. He spends for himself, on his own behalf. When we spend, we don't say it this way in English usually, but by default, we really are spending for ourselves. Again, unless we say otherwise, but then it can't be se. I guess we say on in this context. He spends on himself. Crazy spackle theory. Musk se gasta casi 10 millones en comprar más acciones de Tesla. Musk spends almost 10 million buying more Tesla shares. I think it's cool they use the word acciones or actions for shares. Like a share gives you the right to take the action of taking a percentage or share of the profit. Okay, 2 more examples. Feria del libro. ¿Cuánto se gasta en una visita? I think this is the impersonal se again, right? Or is this the passive? Who cares? That says book fair. How much did they spend on themselves in one visit? We'd have to read the article to know if se gasta referred to one person, one couple, one family, or one whatever. But we can be certain the article will talk about how much one entity spent on one visit. So now the one thing is natural to say, but only followed by person, couple, family, group, or whatever. Pardon me, but does one have any gray poupon? I can't be sure, but in a real conversation, I think I'd say, how much do people spend on a visit? Or if we're already talking about people or some group of people, I'd say, how much do they spend on a visit? Okay, last one, real quickly. I want to show you this one for the contrast with the last one. ¿Cuánto se gasta cada español en bares y restaurantes? Almost exactly the same, but now after se gasta, they do specify who they're talking about, so we don't have to make something up in our head. How much does each Spanish person spend on themselves in bars and restaurants? Or what we'd say for real in English, how much does each Spanish person spend in bars and restaurants? See how those are the same sentences basically? ¿Cuánto se gasta en una visita? Then ¿cuánto se gasta cada español en bares y restaurantes? And if we were already talking about Spanish people in the second one, just ¿cuánto se gasta en bares y restaurantes would send the same message exactly. But the Spanish authority would say one is reflexive and the other is personal. I think. I really don't know. I had to look up all those names to make that last video, and I already, thankfully, forgot them. I hope you're getting my real message in these videos. I'm not saying se is so simple, all you have to do is watch these 2 videos and you'll be done. No, but in these videos, you have seen how to figure out every single example of se you encounter, and when you do as we did in this video, 90%, maybe way more, are super easy right off the bat. The only tricky ones are the metaphors and expressions. Then you gotta know when to use se and when not to. But remember, I couldn't find enough examples of se. Then when I did, I couldn't find the tricky ones, because most examples of se weren't tricky even before we knew what was going on. But now we do know what's going on, so hardly ever will the meaning of se not be crystal clear. Is that clear? Crystal. Please leave a comment or send a message with any se example that still confuses you. I'll do my best to clear things up. I actually look forward to getting some tough examples, so really let her rip. If you haven't already gotten my free Spanish battle plans, do that now at SpanishBattlePlans.com or down there somewhere. I've got a big update coming, so they'll be more helpful than ever. I'll send everybody an email when the update is posted. When we learn something big, like Spanish, the beginning is always the hardest part because we have no context. So much coming at us at once. It's harder to figure out what to learn than it is to learn it. These Spanish battle plans are designed to give you the context you need and crave. They'll give you order, a track to follow. They're not miracles, they can't learn Spanish for you, but download them, look them over, then breathe a little, relax, and pick where to start. Go to SpanishBattlePlans.com and download them for free. Now get out of here. Go be super cute making mistakes with se. Then I'll see you next time. Hasta luego. Adios, amigo.